July 17th, 2025. The kind of day that begins with silence and ends with fire. In the early hours, as most of Ukraine slept, the first signs of trouble came not from the sky, but from the airwaves. Military listening posts began reporting a surge of static, a strange distortion crawling across encrypted frequencies. It was the opening act of something far larger. At 4:45 a.m., the curtain rose. 30 Russian jamming drones, small, fast, and loaded with electronic warfare gear, pierced Ukrainian airspace. They weren't here to kill. They were here to blind, flooding the electromagnetic spectrum. They choked Ukrainian radars and command channels with noise. Screens went from crisp tracks of friendly and hostile aircraft to snowstorms of useless data. And then, from beyond the Black Sea, the real strike arrived. 6-caliber cruise missiles, each a precision weapon costing millions, launched from Russian warships. Their trajectories were deliberate, their targets pre-selected. 3 of Ukraine's most important UAV manufacturing facilities, 2 in Dnipro, 1 in Poltava, places where innovation happened not in glass skyscrapers, but in converted warehouses and aging industrial halls, now repurposed to produce the small, inexpensive drones that have been tormenting Russian armor and supply lines for over a year. Ukraine's newest offensive jewel, a U.S.-supplied Patriot Pack 3 battery, had arrived just 5 days earlier. It was powerful, it was capable, but it was still undergoing software calibration and hadn't yet been integrated into Ukraine's larger air defense network. The system was present, but not ready. The result? 4 missiles intercepted. 2 slipped through. One of them, streaking low under radar cover, slammed directly into Plant 17A in eastern Dnipro. This was no ordinary facility. It was assembling the next batch of Ukraine's long-range reconnaissance drones, the kind that could spot Russian artillery from dozens of kilometers away and guide precision strikes. The warhead detonated in the main assembly hangar. The blast ripped through walls, flung machinery across the floor, and shattered every pane of glass within hundreds of meters. 5 senior engineers died instantly. 20 more were injured, some burned, some buried under debris. The financial damage? Around $60 million in infrastructure, specialized equipment, and unfinished drones gone in seconds. Satellite images hours later showed only blackened concrete and twisted steel. Power lines drooped, melted. Fire still licked at drone chassis left on the production line. This wasn't just a military strike. It was an attempt to rip out Ukraine's technological heart. For Ukraine, drones weren't just tools. They were the great equalizer against a larger, richer, better-equipped enemy. They provided a way to punch far above their weight. Losing a major production site wasn't just losing machines. It was losing momentum, innovation, and the ability to surprise the enemy. For Russia, it was a statement. We can reach deep, and we can hurt you where it matters most. And yet, even as the fire still burned in Dnipro, something else began in secret. A counterattack that no one in Moscow could have predicted. By 10:30 a.m. that same day, in a cold, dimly lit bunker outside Kharkiv, a very different kind of war meeting was underway. The room wasn't much to look at. Bare concrete walls, battered desks, flickering fluorescent lights. But the people inside? Some of Ukraine's sharpest minds. Battle-hardened engineers who'd spent years designing drones from spare parts. UAV tacticians who'd learned, through brutal trial and error, exactly how to outsmart Russian air defenses. They didn't have billion-dollar systems. They didn't have the luxury of time. But they did have something Russia underestimated. Ingenuity born of desperation. On the scarred wooden table before them was a simple plan written in black marker. The arsenal, 110 homemade drones. Many had been built from consumer-grade components, the kind anyone could buy online. Batteries taped together, explosives secured with duct tape. No fancy paint, no stealth shaping. Just crude, functional war machines. 10 jamming drones would go first, flying ahead to blind Russian radars for at least 3 minutes. In warfare, 3 minutes is an eternity. 30 mine-laden drones would follow. Each carried a 15-pound Soviet-era TM-62 anti-tank mine. If intercepted, they'd explode midair, spraying shrapnel and damaging or destroying the very systems firing at them. 70 explosive suicide drones would finish the job, aiming directly for Belgorod 22, one of Russia's most sensitive nuclear weapons facilities, just 58 miles from the border. One Ukrainian colonel, leaning over the table, summed it up: "We don't need stealth bombers. We need chaos. Cheap, dirty, and fast." This wouldn't just be revenge for Dnipro. It would be a message to Russia and to the world. July 18, 2025, 1:10 a.m. The sky over northern Ukraine was a deep, endless black. No stars, no moon, just silence. Then, from concealed launch pads near Sumy, the swarm rose. 110 drones in total. No lights, no radio chatter. They skimmed just meters above the ground, hugging terrain, running entirely on preloaded GPS coordinates. No human piloting, no signals to jam. The first wave, the jammers, crossed into Russian airspace and immediately began emitting bursts of interference across multiple radar bands, built from modified civilian electronics. Their jammers were crude but effective. In minutes, Belgorod 22's radar coverage went blind. The second wave, 30 mine drones, came in low. Russian Tor M2 and Panzer S1 systems opened fire. But when the drones were hit, the mines detonated midair. One explosion shredded a radar antenna. Another destroyed a Panzer launcher from just 30 meters away. The third wave, 70 suicide drones, hit like a hammer. Their targets were precise. Fuel tanks, missile loading bays, the command and control bunker, and the nuclear material handling building. At 1:26 a.m., one drone penetrated the outer shell of the nuclear fuel processing structure. The resulting explosion wasn't nuclear, but ignited stored chemicals, creating a blast radius of nearly a kilometer. Bunkers collapsed. Vehicles burned. Russian losses, according to later leaked estimates: 240 military personnel, including 12 nuclear technicians, 22 M3 strategic bombers destroyed in hangars, 6 armored vehicles, 2 mobile radar systems. The damage, $1.2 to $2 billion, not counting the strategic shock. For over 7 hours after the strike, Belgorod 22 sent no signals, no encrypted commands, no emergency traffic. In the language of nuclear strategy, this was equivalent to going blind and mute at the same time. The Kremlin quietly activated Protocol Vostok 6, shifting control to a backup site near Kursk. Full operation recovery took 12 hours. Inside Russia, paranoia spread. Commanders were placed under house arrest. Social media posts hinted that even deeper, classified programs might have been hit. NATO raised readiness levels. Israel puts Iron Dome and David Sling on 24-hour nuclear site alert. Oil prices spiked nearly 9%. But perhaps the biggest shock was the cost comparison. $1,200 drones versus $90 million bombers. Off-the-shelf batteries versus cutting-edge radar. Military planners worldwide took notice. Studies into low-cost swarm warfare began in at least a dozen countries. Belgorod 22's destruction wasn't just a tactical win. It was proof that military dominance no longer depends on size and wealth, but on adaptability and will. Ukraine had shown the world that even a nation under siege can rewrite the rules of war, not with stealth fighters or aircraft carriers, but with duct tape, spare parts, and the determination to strike back. In the wars to come, will we spend more on domination or imagination? The silence that shook the Kremlin. For the Russian military, silence is not peace. Silence is danger. And for 7 hours after Ukrainian swarm struck, Belgorod 22 was nothing but silence. No outgoing signals. No encrypted transmissions. Not even emergency redundancy traffic. For a facility that monitored, maintained, and, in theory, could launch nuclear weapons, this was a nightmare scenario. In nuclear doctrine, communication isn't optional. It's the nervous system. And Ukraine had just severed it. Inside Russia's underground situation rooms, tension mounted. Senior generals demanded answers. Why had the radar gone dark? How did the swarm penetrate without warning? And most dangerously, was this just the first wave? At 3 a.m., reports from the Belgorod region painted a grim picture. Multiple fires still burning, emergency crews unable to reach certain sectors due to unexploded ordnance, and heavy chemical smoke drifting across nearby villages. Local officials quietly ordered evacuations, but the instructions were kept off public channels. By dawn, Moscow initiated Protocol Vostok 6, a rarely acknowledged contingency plan designed for wartime. It shifted strategic oversight to a backup nuclear command node near Kursk. Normally, such a reallocation happens during direct attacks on Moscow or the possibility of full-scale war. The move caused immediate disruption. Regional command networks had to be resynced, air defense grids realigned, and command hierarchies adjusted on the fly. What should have taken minutes took hours. Western intelligence later estimated that for 12 full hours, Russia's Western theater of operations was operating at less than 40% of its normal coordination capacity. That's not a glitch. That's a vulnerability, and everyone watching knew it. In Moscow, the mood shifted from shock to paranoia. Intercepted communications from the Federal Protective Service, FSO, revealed that 17 officers stationed at Belgorod 22 were being investigated for negligence. 3 senior commanders were placed under house arrest. Military bloggers, some with close ties to the Kremlin, hinted at something darker, that Ukraine's strike may have damaged classified research facilities or even prototype warhead transport units. The Kremlin, predictably, denied it all, but 2 independent satellite intelligence firms published time-lapse thermal imagery showing a cluster of deep underground bunkers going cold, a telltale sign of the system shut down. If true, Ukraine hadn't just destroyed fuel tanks and bombers. It may have temporarily disabled part of Russia's nuclear support infrastructure. Overnight, at least 9 Russian garrisons near the Ukrainian border were put on high alert. Patrols doubled. Air defense crews slept in their vehicles. Officers refused to sleep inside ammunition depots, fearing another precision swarm might hit before sunrise. And in the information space, the reaction was just as volatile. Russian social media exploded with speculation before state censors moved in. Posts claiming nuclear disaster averted or Ukraine hit secret lab vanished within hours. But in an age of screenshots, nothing ever truly disappears. While Russia scrambled to contain the damage, the rest of the world was watching. NATO intelligence briefings went into overdrive. The U.S. Strategic Command ordered a quiet review of all drone countermeasures at its own missile silos. Israel raised its Iron Dome and David Sling batteries to 24-hour readiness around its nuclear facilities. Japan's defense ministry convened an emergency session to assess how similar low-cost swarms could threaten its own maritime bases. Even countries far from conflict, like Brazil and South Africa, began running tabletop war games exploring drone saturation attacks on critical infrastructure. The markets reacted instantly. Oil prices surged 8.7% in a single trading day, with analysts citing regional nuclear instability as the main driver. Defense stocks rose sharply. Civilian drone manufacturers saw their share prices climb as militaries around the world began to grasp just how disruptive and accessible this technology had become. The most staggering detail wasn't the scale of destruction, it was the math. Ukraine's entire strike force cost roughly $100,000 to build. That's less than the price of a single modern main battle tank. In return, it had destroyed $90 million worth of strategic bombers, armored vehicles, and radar systems worth tens of millions more, fuel and chemical stores whose loss could not easily be replaced, and, perhaps most costly of all, Russia's sense of invulnerability. For decades, nuclear powers built their defense postures on the belief that certain facilities, deeply buried, heavily guarded, bristling with radar and missile defenses, were untouchable. On July 18, 2025, that belief died. By July 20th, NATO, Japan, South Korea, and several Gulf states had launched urgent studies into swarm doctrine. These weren't abstract research projects. They were crash programs aimed at integrating swarm tactics into real-world battle planning. At the Pentagon, a classified memo circulated among senior defense officials. It called Ukraine's strike a harbinger of post-industrial warfare and warned that conventional thinking based on size, speed, and armor could collapse when faced with cheap, expendable, unpredictable systems. In military academies, instructors began sketching new war game scenarios. Not how to defend against stealth bombers, but how to survive a 300 drone saturation attack. Not how to maintain air superiority, but how to maintain command and control when you can't see the enemy. What truly unsettled military strategists wasn't just the damage or the cost efficiency. It was the origin of the strike. These drones weren't born in defense megafactories. They came from small workshops, garages, and university labs. Many were built by teams of students, volunteers, and engineers working with consumer parts. The message was clear. The next great military disruptor may not come from a general in uniform, but from a teenager who was soldering iron and an idea no one thought possible. In the smoldering aftermath of Belgorod 22, Ukraine had sent a signal louder than any missile could deliver. We may be smaller. We may have fewer resources, but we can reach you anywhere. The strike was more than retaliation for Dnipro. It was a lesson in asymmetric imagination, and it forced every military planner, from Washington to Beijing, to confront a new reality. Air superiority is no longer the exclusive domain of superpowers. Cost asymmetry has become a weapon in itself. Innovation under pressure can outperform decades of traditional doctrine. For much of modern history, military supremacy was measured in tonnage, firepower, and the size of your defense budget. But on that July night, the calculus changed. Now, supremacy may be measured in adaptability, creativity, and the ability to weaponize the unthinkable.